Jeff?
Hello and welcome to this, our 5th episode of Learn English with Jeff. Food. If you're French and you're wanting to improve how you speak and understand English, you ought to know Anglophones, English speakers in general, don't have nearly the same love for food as do the French. It's reflected historically in the quality of the food cooked in American homes versus the average home-cooked food eaten in French homes. Of course, there are exceptions. My mom loved cooking for decades and particularly likes cooking healthy food. And while in restaurants in New York, food quality could be compared to a meal in Paris, the real difference is in the amount of conversation that French have talking about food around a table. This just doesn't happen in the US too often. The French love to talk about food. C'est vrai? As I love living in France and being French, I've been cooking a lot more lately, French recipes, and maybe you know already, French food has a lot of eggs, cheese, cream, and butter. Quiches, crepes, gratin dauphinois, omelets with cheese. Julia Child famously brought over French cuisine to American households. If you don't know who she is, Julia Child had a famous TV show and has quite a personality. Now, I'm not going to start my own cooking show, although plenty of people on YouTube have, but I am going to talk about some of the language nuances that I've noticed so far when it comes to food between French and American English language. Noodles and spaghetti. In France, you can roughly translate noodles and spaghetti as les nuits and les pâtes. I say roughly translate because les nuits might not be pronounced correctly, and I currently understand it refers to Asian noodles rather than just noodles. Les pâtes, Italian pasta. In the US, this subtlety doesn't exist. We can cook up some Italian pasta for our child and then cut the noodles, or we can cook up some Asian noodles and serve it to our family and say, here's some pasta. We would say noodles more often for these kind of dishes that have rice noodles, for example, and we would say pasta more often for Italian, but we call it lasagna noodles, for example, rather than lasagna pasta. The US and France are in different geographic locations. South of the US is Mexico, and something very popular to eat in the US, particularly in the Southwest, but now all across the United States, are tacos. A rough equivalent for France, south of France is the Maghreb, Northern Africa, where they eat kebabs. And in fact, watching a television show the other day, I saw an English word, taco, translated into French as kebab. It's not an exact translation, but it gives the cultural equivalent. Blueberries. These have been for a long time one of my favorite fruits. As they're cultivated locally, the blueberries that are grown and consumed in the Americas are actually different, quite distinctly. You can taste it, and they look different than the blueberries in Europe. And this is reflected actually in the the name. For a long time I was confused how to translate blueberries in French, and I learned they're actually given two different names depending on whether you're in Canada or in France. In Canada, le bleuet. In France, les myrtilles. The final matter I wanted to discuss today, because I could talk about food all day long, maybe you too, and this doesn't have to do with language, but it does have to do with food and differences in taste, as in what we taste with our tongue. I've already talked about blueberries. Strawberries are a good example of the differences in taste. If you haven't been to the US, to a large grocery store there, you might not know, strawberries in the US tend to be sold in bulk. They're big strawberries, more like that size, or around there, around the same size, and they are bright red and not so much flavor. In France, strawberries tend to be much smaller or different shapes and have more tart flavor. This is partly because they're grown more locally and they taste like they're fresh picked from a farm. This has to do with consumer tastes. Majority of French prefer and will put their money where their mouth is to buy these type of strawberries. It's another reason that I'm happy to be living here in France. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Learn English with Jeff. Share in the comments below or in an email to the email address in the show notes some of your favorite foods, and if there's something connected to language that you've noticed. There's always more to talk about when it comes to food. Look forward to seeing your comments. Till next time.